are ready to turn Robert's ramblings over to Robert.
Believe me, we're really going to ramble tonight. I just wanted to, before I do this, take a, I was hoping that Harold Jacobs was going to be here tonight, but he's nearly 100 years old and he's lived almost all of the history of Urbandale as an incorporated town. And he apparently wasn't able to make it. He's just been a treasure house of information for me as I work on the history of Urbandale. But before we do this, I want to take a little survey, see who has lived in Urbandale the longest. Give me a shot. My wife and I got here in '56. Anybody longer than that?
I doubt it.
Good.
My husband had his office here probably in '59,
59, yeah.
I think.
Okay. So I guess, Verda, you and I are the senior aged residents of Urbandale. So I want to talk first a little bit about what we found when we came to Urbandale. We never had planned to come to Urbandale. Verda had been out looking for houses, and it happened that I had come to Des Moines from the Navy to work for the old Western Mutual Insurance Company down at 10th and Woodland. And at 10th and Woodland, one of my fellow employees was a man by the name of Dale Ulfers. And Dale Ulfers lived in Urbandale and was the son-in-law of Ray Stewart. And the Stewarts had owned all of the land where the mall and the old monastery was. So I rode with Dale for a month, and to show you that it's they wanted me to learn what an adjustment, I didn't ride with him a month, but to show you what a small world it is. He came from Persia, and one night we went over and stayed with his parents, and they were talking about a school teacher that lived downstairs. And lo and behold, a cousin of mine was their tenant downstairs. So we went down and visited. But when we moved to Urbandale, there was a four-way stop at Douglas and 70th, a four-way stop sign. Now, maybe some of you do remember that. It lasted for quite a few years. Douglas Avenue was paved out to the point about where the Hy-Vee West entrance is now, and then it ran into a gravel road. North of, on 70th Street, there were woven wire fences on both sides of the street going up to the McDivitt Grove Cemetery. Now, I mentioned Dale because I'm going to come back to that, the Stewart thing, but Urbandale was still quite rural, and it had a number of dairies, and I'll name them a little later. But I want to go back now to even earlier to the, and remember that what I say tonight, some is fact and some is theory. And I'm glad that you're recording this tonight, Pat, because I want to point out what is theory and what is fact as I speak. Facts I find when I read the newspapers. And I consider those, if we read it in the register, it is indeed a fact. Now, I have searched and run into many dead ends. We had a large barn out here behind the house, and it burned. And one of the Olmsted family told me that they were plowing corn when it burned, which means to me that it burned in probably June or July. Narrows it down. But you've got to read a lot of newspapers to get that. I think it probably, a fire like that made the newspaper because they had the Des Moines Fire Department come out and help with that fire. But it's going to be for later historians to find out when that happened. But there's their clue. Try June or July because they're plowing corn, that helps us. The goal, I had written an article for one of the, and I'm not too sure what it was for, but the goal was missed and a town was born. Onward goes the interurban railway. This is the first page news in the Des Moines Register and Leader on November 27th, 1904. The city of Des Moines was expanding westward, hoping to complete one of the best short lines to Adel and further west. The grading contractor, Deems and Barnes of Galva, Illinois, employed 150 men in earth moving and grade building, utilizing dump wagons, slip scrapers, and steam shovels to prepare the roadbed and lay the rails. 5 miles were to be graded by January, and by early the following spring, the route was to be determined and pushed to completion. Now, as I read the newspapers, there's all kinds of thought about where this route was going. They're talking about they're going up to Woodward and Perry, but then there's articles about they're going on to Adel. And Vern and I came from Shelby, Iowa, and we even find that there was talk of going to Shelby. Now, why they would go to Shelby, I thought, why would they do that? Well, I find out that one of the men on the railway was from Shelby. Rush Benedict was Speaker of the Iowa House. He was on the board, and he and a man from Logan thought they ought to extend it on out to their towns. Well, that never happened. So by December 1904, the grade had been completed within several hundred feet of the southeast corner of the Des Moines architect Oliver Smith's 40-acre pasture in Webster Township, a location to the north and west of Des Moines. Cold weather brought the grade work to a halt. In January 1905, the Interurban Board of Directors were counting inflated land prices on the proposed Perry route. Also, legal expenses would be incurred by condemnation proceedings, making the expansion difficult to continue. The alternative was to choose a route on the west side of the Des Moines River where more reasonably priced land was available. This was chosen as an alternate route, and the grade to Webster Township was sold to the Des Moines Street Railway. By August 1905, streetcar service to and from Des Moines had been established, transporting coal miners and farmers and freight. Within a few years, a livery stable, blacksmith shop, and grocery store were erected near the street railway turning loop, which is now the corner of 70th and Roseland. These businesses formed the nucleus of a new town. Today, the Bill Lawson Trailer Park memorializes the dream of a railroad pioneers unfulfilled for what became uniquely Urbandale. And I think that uniquely Urbandale is so fitting when, and I think perhaps the people that chose it didn't think about this, but when we think of many of the towns in Iowa that failed because they heard the railroad was coming, they platted a town, and then the railroad went a mile or two off, and the town failed. Urbandale exists because the railroad failed, and the town exists because they had this unfinished grade out here, and what to do with it. They sold it to the Des Moines Street Railway, and a town grew at the end of that. We grew from that point. Now, I also have now a theory, Pat, about, we talk about the naming of Urbandale. I suspect that the trolleys coming out here, they didn't want to say the end of the line on their trolley car. They had to do something, so there was the Beaver area, and they were stopping there, and I don't know, there was Beaver Dale at that time, but if they were stopping at the Beaver exit, they had to get a name for way out in the country where they're gonna stop, and they thought, well, we'll get the urban name into it, and we'll call it Urbandale. So I'm suspecting that the Urbandale name really came from the streetcar company. Now, that's theory. So, leave it there. The streetcars were bringing an influx of homeowners. One boost to the area was the event of the streetcar line that had been extended to Urbandale in 1905, the turnaround at 70th and Roseland. And this was the location of Urbandale's first businesses. The streetcar delivered supplies and was also used by doctors to make house calls to see their patients. Many families did not have a car and used the streetcar for transportation. Service ended on the trolley in 1951. The Des Moines Register on April 6, 1917 ran an ad for Urbandale property, a subdivision of 161 half-acre lots near Urbandale car line, but they were not included in the area incorporated. 63rd Street was the Urbandale boundary, and those lots which sold for $500 were located between 58th Street and 62nd, south of Douglas Avenue. Acreages in Urbandale were typically from 5 to 12 acres. 64th Street from Roseland Drive to Douglas Avenue, for instance, was divided into 8 5-acre lots. People moving to Urbandale then were interested in country living where they could have some chickens, a good-sized garden, perhaps raise a couple of pigs or a cow. People often ask how the town was named, and here we're getting into this. Although no one is sure, it is thought to come from the interurban railway that went to Boone, not the urban family. Urbandale picnics were heard annually starting in 1909, 8 years before incorporation. But they were also held in Fagan's Grove and Beaverdale at Beaver and Urbandale Avenues. Now, a number of dairies operated in Urbandale during the 20s and 30s. Among these were those owned by the Lambs, the Stewarts, the Walkers, the Kerns, and the Burnsteads. The Burnstead house was right across the street. And a turkey farm operated by Laird Jones from 1946 to 54 was located at the northeast corner of 64th and Douglas Avenue. He raised 1,200 turkeys a year there. I remember the turkey farm being there. It was not, the turkeys were gone by this time. Some of the cages were still there, but they were gone. And also I remember on the Stewart property, there was a barn on the north side of the street about where IHOP is, and the barn was built over the creek. Now, there couldn't have been a lot of drainage down through that creek because that barn was actually, the water flowed underneath it. I suspect that there was a spring up there that kept water in that creek, and as they operated their dairy, they lowered cans down into that creek under the barn to cool the milk and the cream. And I remember that very well. It was really unique. I'd never seen a barn with a creek underneath. As you extended later, as they extended south of that, when they built those houses along 64th on the east side, they got into animal bones, and it appeared that there had been a buffalo wallow there, and they found many bones of ancient animals that had gotten trapped in that. And those first 3 houses on that street on the east side are actually floating on a slab. They got into trouble trying to put down basements, and they've got some thick slabs, and they actually float on those slabs in that old wallow. So that was an interesting thing that they found. Coal mining started in Urbandale in the 20s with mining of low-grade soft coal. The largest of the 4 mines was a Des Moines ice and fuel mine located at what is now the site of Karen Acres Elementary School. When the school was built in 64, the shower houses from the mine was converted into a 3-room annex. Other mines included the Urbandale coal mine at 78th Street and Meredith Drive, the Beck coal mine on Merle Hay Road. A majority of the mines in Des Moines, miners lived in Des Moines and commuted by streetcar. Coal shafts are located under much of Urbandale. Electricity became available in 1917 when the lines were put through to Camp Dodge. Water lines were hooked up in 34 by the WBA, and sewer lines were installed in 1950. And when we moved to Urbandale, I said it must be an area for itinerant ditch diggers. I mean, they were starting to build houses. Don Benton was building Karen Acres, and there were ditches everywhere. I mean, they're putting ditches on Douglas and there was a lot of ditch digging going on. Then when they, Don Benton was very early in building Karen Acres, and I understand that they had a number of houses there when we moved here. But in some places where they dug for basements, they were getting old cinders and so on that had been placed there as in the mine, from the mine. And there was quite a lot of that slack there. Now I'll jump back to about that slack, and Harold Jacobs told me something that was interesting just the other day. When the trolley came out, down between 64th Street, what we know as 64th and 67th, on Urbandale Avenue, there was a trestle. As you recall, there's quite a ditch goes down there by that, there's a, what do I want to say, there's a lot of trailer park down there. And back in there is quite a ditch. So they had to trestle that. And well, first of all, the streets in Urbandale in the 1930s were almost non-existent. This street out of here would have been a dirt road, and anything that was where they were getting houses would be a problem because there'd be dirt in front of them. And so the power company downtown was sending out cinders, and down about where the Blackhurst School was it was a dump, so it was built a big bin, and they had an elevator with a belt on it. They could elevate into that bin, and you could take a dump truck down there and go under there and get those cinders. And I suspect that they were selling, and the power company was selling these cinders. Now, Harold says he doesn't remember too much. He remembers getting them in his dump truck, and actually one time taking 5 loads. They got some they wanted to get rid of, and they said, if you'll haul them away, we'll give them to you. And he went down and got 5 truckloads of them and took them over and dumped them on 68th Street because it was just a wallow down there. And he dumped all those cinders in there. Now, finally, when the trolley stopped running, they had this trestle there, and the power company sent out these loads of cinders and started at the end, at the west end, and going west and dumping them and covered the trestle. And I cannot find, and I can remember, when that street actually caught fire. And they were down there with they had a drag line, and the fire department was down there putting water on there to try to cool that down because it was actually smoking and kind of burning under Urbandale Avenue. And there's no one left in the fire department that seems to remember that, but I remember it very well. And Harold kind of answered that question the other day when I was talking to him. He says, all of those cinders that they brought out were not completely burned. He said they still had some small bits of coal in them, which would even add to that spontaneous combustion under that street. I've been reading the urban news. I can't find anything about that. Maybe someday we'll be able to find something about that. And I think there might have even been something in the Des Moines Register about Urbandale's problem with that, trying to get that street fire down because it actually connected very close to Des Moines. So then the schools were the thing that really brought things to life. Typically a new town is formed because of the growth of an area and a desire of local people to have their own government. But Urbandale's situation was not typical. The town formed because of the schools. The town formed. Now this is getting to incorporation. At the beginning of this century, the area that is now Urbandale was a community of family farms, typically 1/4 of a section. 2 one-room schools served the area, the McDivitt School at Meredith Drive and 74th, and the Center School at Meredith Drive and 100th. Children east of Northwest 86th Street went to the center school, to a center school. Rural school consolidation had been very slow in Iowa until 1913, when state legislation offered state and to consolidate schools based on the number of rooms in the school. Johnson School District became consolidated and took in the area up to Meredith Drive, including the McDivitt School. Now, it's interesting, I think that Buffalo Center, Iowa was the very first consolidated school in Iowa. And again, it's a small world because the first graduating class from the Buffalo Center School included a man that became the Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, and he became kind of the Legionnaire's Legionnaire. And help me, Bert, on my name here, the paper, it's the newspaper, the thing he put out. Anyway, he was a Secretary of Agriculture, and he was a great Legionnaire. And he becomes involved when they start a Legion in Urbandale. He comes out to speak to the Legion. And it's interesting, this paper that I have that he put out is put out by the department. Yeah, Ray, the merry-go-round, Ray Murray.
Yeah.
He graduated from the first high school class that graduated from the Buffalo School. And he became the editor of the Algona newspaper. And then he became State Secretary of Agriculture, and he put out the merry-go-round. And the merry-go-round was a bad time to be Secretary of Agriculture. He was in 1932 and 36 when farmers were invading the legislature with pitchforks. And so in order to try to keep his sanity, I think, he became known as the Iowa Corn Crib Poet. And he has 3 books of poetry that are just wonderful. And he has one that's called, and I wish I'd have brought the thing in, To a Horse, the Ode to a Horse. And, "O horse, you are a wondrous thing, no horns to honk, no bells to ring, no license buying every year with plates to stick on front and rear. Your inner tubes are all okay, and thank the Lord they stay that way." And I can't tell you all the rest of it, but this kind of poetry that he put out. And it's hard to find his poetry books. I have 2 of them, and he had them done in Mason City by Clipto. So we'll ramble a little more here and talk about, where did you meet in Urbandale in 1956 when we came here? Well, the Legion Hall was about the only place. The Legion had been formed here, and I'm going to pass around a picture. Well, actually 2 pictures. You can start these. This is a picture of the digging of the footings for the Legion Hall, and also of the early officers of the Legion. And Harold picked out a couple of them. One of them is Mr. Roseman, who was the superintendent of school, another man by the name of Gillespie. And I don't know that they really know. And we always find these treasures. And one of the treasures we found down at the Legion Hall, they had it in the early years, they had an excellent historian, and he had put these pictures in a booklet that they have there, and we didn't know they had them there at the house. But that was our place to meet, was the Legion Hall. I started to talk about the consolidation. People south of Meredith Drive then managed to raise $2,000 to build a 1-room school. A lot was purchased at 70th and Douglas, and the school opened in 1913. Johnston Consolidated District was then threatening to extend its boundaries another mile south, and there was talk of busing students to Johnston by horse-drawn carriage. The only way to prevent this was by forming an independent school district, which could be done only by first incorporating the town. A petition was filed on March 5th, 1917 for an election to incorporate 2,562 acres that was described as 3 miles west of Des Moines city limits. It took in an area from 63rd Street to northwest 86th Street and from about Urbandale Avenue to Meredith Drive. 49 votes were cast in opposition. Women were not allowed to vote at that time. The 1920 census showed the population to be 298. With the rapid development in 1960 came a surge of children in the district, creating a crisis in Urbandale schools. The city schools' bonding capacity was too small to build the classrooms needed. For a few years, classes were held in various places, including Sears Road, Buck Store, Lions Park, Shelter House, several churches. Eventually, supply caught up with demand in '91, and Urbandale Community School District built a new gym and had resource centers of its own. Today, this district serves approximately 3,500 students. Now, I'm going to, while I'm thinking about it, move a little bit from something that I talked about, the coal mines. The last vestige of the coal mine is the remains of the road that ran from Douglas Avenue down to the mine. Excuse me, at the corner of 75th and Wilden, right across from the Aldersgate Church, is the house on that corner. The drive that leads into that house is a piece of that mine road. They took that road out when they built the El Rodeo, and but that piece still is in there, and it's kind of a distinctive color. You can tell it wasn't concrete like we would pour today, but it's kind of a reddish color, and it was a part of that road. So let's ramble on. Now we get to the part that Norm likes. Norm says, you don't want to visit this. And I've got to thank Pat Finnerty for this. He found a real gem here. And it has to do with, there must have been, now remember, well, first of all, we go back a little bit. He found two things. And I'm going to pass this around. It's a Sunday scene at the old swimming hole near the end of the Urbandale line. And where was the old swimming hole? Must have been down in that creek someplace. But this is 1909, so they're calling it Urbandale. I'll pass that around. Pat, where did you find that one? That was a Drake, or where was that?
No, it was in, I forget what does it say on there the name of the newspaper? At the bottom?
Des Moines
Yeah.
News.
It was Des Moines News from June 28, 1909. I actually found that in a newspaper out in Waukee. Because they have quite a nice collection online, or I say online, their computer repositories of some old newspapers. So I came across this one. Let me just put this in here for a moment.
You just keep finding little gems, and when he came with that, and he found one that's even more spectacular about the same time, that involved that brought forth a Ding Darling cartoon. Now, all must not have been sweetness of light by 1911 with respect to the trolley system in Des Moines. And I suspect that they were having some troubles because of what the Darling cartoon is about. But this is a headline in the newspaper. This is from the Des Moines News, January 11th, 1911. And listen to this. Passengers wreck car. Street seats are tossed in the river. Passengers of Urbandale car number 31, disgusted because the fire in the car stove would not burn, this morning wrecked the car and threw parts of it in the Des Moines River. Conductor F.S. Dow and motorman A. Messon were deliberately overpowered and thrown from the cars. windows were broken, seats were torn loose, and the stove was knocked out of position. Then the passengers walked. The affair occurred on the bridge, on the Beltline Bridge across the Des Moines River. Now, that bridge still exists today, just south of the Euclid Avenue Bridge. You can still see that bridge where the trolley came across. Witnesses say the wrecking started out of a joke about the fire in the stove. It was scarcely burning and the car was about as cold as a refrigerator, and there were 7 passengers. "Let's show them how to build a fire," said one. "Surely they need teaching," said another. "They haven't anything to burn that's any good," said a third. Burn the seats," one suggested. Then the trouble started. The passengers left their seats, walked to the front of the car, removed the stove lid. One man jerked a cross seat loose and threw it on the stove, and then threw the conductor and the motorman off. They tried to stop the mix-up, and the passengers tossed them out. "We'll fix this old canal boat," was the howl. The windows were smashed, the seats were tossed into the road, even the advertisements on the top of the car were torn off. The passengers went into the vestibule where they finished the wrecking. The windows were broken and even the sign on the front was thrown in the ditch. The riders quietly buttoned up their overcoats and departed. The conductor and the motorman were permitted to get back in the car. They drove it to the car barns for repairs. There were no women on board. Street officials did not think the affair amounted to much. "As far as I have found, but 2 seats were torn out," said D.M. Finch, claim agent for the streetcar company. "The affair all started over a joke. I cannot say if there will be any prosecutions." Urbandale residents say this is just the first of a series of smashings planned for Urbandale cars if the streetcar company does not fix up the line. So things were not too happy about the streetcar service. Then comes Ding Darling's cartoon. The Urbandale worm has turned. And it shows a citizen on a chair speaking, says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to nominate the citizens of Urbandale for mayor and city councilman of Des Moines." And some people from Des Moines are saying, "Too bad the mayor and city council couldn't have been there to get some pointers on how to handle the streetcar question." So there's one for you to look at. That came from Dean Darling, and I think that's just a treasure that you found for us. Don't know what happened after that, but probably we could read some more in the papers. But that was an interesting bit of news that Pat found.
One original,
Riots in their.
well, actually 2, like one of them. I
You
think.
can tell them about hauling eggs.
Well, I'm gonna get to that, I guess, another ramble. Yes, at the end of the streetcar line now, I didn't know it, and I had been to Urbandale one time in my life before we moved to Urbandale. I was a student at Simpson, and a fella arranged a blind date for me with a girl that was he told me from Des Moines. And I was, at that time, living in a farm and working for a farm couple that lived northeast of Des Moines. Now, his name was Orville Howard, and he always talked about things that had happened in this town where he lived as a boy. And it turns out that he was a student at the school out on Meredith Drive, the West School. And there's a picture in here of the students in that school, and I've been able to see him in there, and another man Frank Minogue, who lived across from us in a little house across the street. Those are the only 2 guys I think we have labeled it correctly in that picture, but they were students at that school. Now, he let me bring his car to Des Moines that night, and we dated these girls. And as I remember, they lived out on Woodland Avenue and were nursing students. Well, the other couple went on their way, and it was up to me to bring this girl not home to Woodland Avenue where she lived, but out to her parents in this town out west someplace. And I think that I know the house on Oliver Smith Drive, I think was where I took her, was on the very street where I would live many years later. But my wife is frowning at me. Not frowning as much as the daughter of the man who loaned me the car said, it sure is nice, Dad, nice for my dad to loan you a car to go to Des Moines to date this girl. I mentioned that, of course, the Urbandale Legion was important as a place to meet, and it was completed in 1944. And we have some pictures of the Urbandale Legion building from the paper. It shows it here with the passing around the digging of the footings, and here it is, and you can come and see this later. This is taken in June of 1944. I'm a little surprised that they were able to complete that building in 44 because it was wartime and the material was really hard to get. And it says the building be 44 by 60 feet, having a frontage of 144 feet on Douglas Avenue. Now, we didn't have a newspaper in Urbandale at that time, but we have another thing that is very valuable, and we have the copies of much of it here in the house, is the Blue Jay Chatter. And that really kind of covered some things that were important to our history today. And it tells in the Blue Jay Chatter that they're building this Legion Hall, and it says in there that it's built so that they can put a second story on it. Now, that's never happened, but it's in the Blue Jay Chatter. The Blue Jay Chatter also carries some interesting articles, and of course, one is about Glenn McDowell, who probably most of you know who he was. He was our local hero Marine who became a prisoner of war, and see if I can find that. Well, it'll have to go on. But it also, in the Blue Jay Chatter, it tells some former student who's been killed in World War II, and it carries some rather important pieces of information that we would not have picked up at a local paper. Probably we would find them if we went through the Des Moines paper piece by piece or page by page. But now, I want to get back to another thing that happened, and this involved the Legion. And I gave this talk to the Legion, and I don't think that many of them realized this. And at the time I was working for this farmer at Indianola, I remember it so well because we talked about it. Television was in its infancy, and radio was still giving most of the news. In 1949, radios and newspapers across the United States reported that a little girl in California had fallen over 65 feet into an abandoned 14-inch pipe. 12 days later, on April 19, 1949, Betty Johnson, a 4-year-old Urbandale girl, fell into an abandoned well. Urbandale didn't have rescue equipment and called for help from Des Moines. Mrs. Noreen Jameson was lowered with a clothesline rope into the well. The rope broke, but she was down about 40 feet and lifted the little girl up and out of the water onto her shoulders. There were lots of encouraging comments from above, but little action. Max Hughes volunteered to be lowered head first to get the little girl. She reached her hands up and he brought her out safely. You can imagine being lowered head first down in there. Must have tied something around his feet. And lowered her head first. She reached her hands up and they brought her out safely. He lost his billfold. The Des Moines Fire Department finally arrived with all the equipment they thought they might need, and Mrs. Jameson got out of the well. That same day, the Urbandale well and about 500 others in the area around Des Moines were filled with any available material. Now, also, now I'm going to read you the article about this because of the Legion. This was very interesting to them because the Des Moines Register carried this. It was big news because of the Kathy Fiscus thing just a few weeks before in California. In fact, Kathy Fiscus, this was the first time that they had equipment, television equipment could be taken out to the scene to send pictures back to the station to transmit nationwide. KTLA went out there and they were there all the time. They're digging along this pipe to try to rescue this girl. And they dug for 3 days and they didn't get her out alive. But this became a circus out there. And it actually was the subject of a movie that, and I have seen this movie years ago, but there were vendors out there selling food. It became almost a carnival at this Kathy Fiscus scene. And when it was all over, and even before this movie was made, many states passed what they called a Kathy Fiscus law. We have it over many of the states in the U.S. regarding the filling of abandoned wells. It brought on a lot of that. Anyway, here's a story in the Des Moines Register about this, and it says, well, heroine cites a good strong rope. Mrs. Jameson recounts rescue of the girl, gets a flood of mail and phone calls. Des Moines well incident last Tuesday when 4-year-old Betty Johnson of Urbandale was rescued from a 40-foot well shaft attracted nationwide attendance. Incidentally, I knew her sister, her younger sister used to hang out at our house a lot. She was one of the kids that was up at the roller rink so much, and she and her boyfriend used to be at our house a lot because his mother was a single lady trying to raise 2 kids, and he was a great kid, and he was dating her, and she was a younger sister of the Betty Johnson. Particularly aware of this is Mrs. Betty Jacobson, 3912 68th Street, credited with saving the child's life. Since Tuesday, Mrs. Jameson, a housewife with a 6-year-old daughter of her own, has been besieged with telephone calls, letters and telegrams congratulating her on her act of heroism. Thursday night, she received a triple string of pearls and a $50 war bond from the Urbandale American Legion Post Auxiliary. On May 2nd, she will be given the first Save a Life award made by the Des Moines Safety Council. So we could go on and telling you about this. It's a long, long story, but well, I'm just going to read a couple things she got in the mail. Here's somebody from Chicago writing. From our association with you and knowing you as we do, we fully realize that under the circumstances, there was no choice for you, Noreen. The job was there and you did it. Now, I don't know, this must have been a friend. And this is from Esterville, a stranger. I want to know how I admire your courage in going down the well. It was a real act of heroism. You might easily have lost your life. Here's someone from Kansas City writing, an associate of Mrs. Jameson's husband. With pleasure and pride, I heard the radio and read in the paper are very exceptional. Heroic Gasky on the part of Mrs. Jameson. See, they're hearing this in Kansas City. This is big news because of what's happened in California. It really made the national news. So, anyway, she tells it here, but she's, did anyone know Martin Visser? Martin Visser was not a light
No.
sort of guy.
No, he
And
was,
she tells it here that Martin Visser leaned over the edge and was going to, and she got worried that he might fall in on top of her.
I don't think he would have made it to the bottom.
I remember Martin Visser, and I am wondering, it tells that where this happened, must have been up kind of at this in 38. The Johnsons lived down a little further south, and I don't know where she was up there, but she was a block or two from home where she fell in. So that was, Urbandale got big news in that one. Now, I want to talk about, I talked about the dairies, or mentioned the dairies. And did anyone ever hear of the sanitary milk district of Des Moines? See if I can get it to come up here now. It's called the Newell's Sanitary Dairy Historic District. I had never heard of it, but I started to read. First of all, I mentioned Dale Ulfers and the Stewarts, who owned the land where the 80 acres where the mall is now, and where that monastery was. But Mr. Stewart, Mrs. Ulfer's father, lived on the south side of Douglas Avenue, and the Stewarts and Dale, the son-in-law, and his wife, Marge Stewart, lived on the corner of 62nd. I think there's a pub right there now, and I think that Mr. Stewart lived just about, there's a U-Haul there now, and then there was another house built west of there in that block. And I think that Dale and Marge, when they first got married, he was a carpenter, and he had built that house west of his father-in-law, and then they sold that house and moved and built another house on the corner east. And right across the road from Mr. Stewart's house, or maybe where Dale and Marge lived, Rudy, who laid our bricks out here?
Oh, the landscaper?
The landscaper laid our bricks. Anyway, they had leased some land, and they had their landscaping service over there. I'll think of the name in just a little bit, but anyway, right across the road. And then living in the house, the original Stewart house on the north side, by the barn, was Uncle Warren Stewart. And Uncle Warren was very reclusive, and there were a lot of stories written by Uncle Warren. People would discover him and come out and visit with him and take pictures and ask the story of his life. But he was quite reclusive, but not so with his brother Ray Stewart, who lived on the south side. And Ray Stewart had this dairy, and in about 1935, Bob Lamb was, I think, buying most of his. I think Bob Lamb started out working for the Stewart dairy. And I was instructed by Dale Ulfers when I moved to Urbandale, now you take your milk from Bob Lamb, because Bob Lamb was also buying milk from his father-in-law. And incidentally, we were told now, he introduced us to Barney Wilder, who had just come into the drugstore, Bob Sellers, who had the Phillips 66, where the Come and Go is now, and let's see, there's one other person. He says, you're going to need to cash checks. That was before the days when we had all this plastic money. So he said, I want you to meet these fellows because you're going to need to write a check now and then and want them to know who you are. But Ray Stewart, they had formed this, I wish I could find what, it was a milk dealer's bottle exchange. And it was in this sanitary milk district over at 39th.
39th.
39th and 29th.
24th and
About 24th and University.
Right.
It's called the
Newens, that's,
Sanitary Milk District.
yeah.
And it's on the National Register now. I'd never heard of it. But they formed, and they were starting, government was starting to press on sanitary milk, and they formed this sanitary milk district, and Newlands was one of the very early ones that said, we will pasteurize our milk and later homogenize milk, and so they were meeting state standards. But they also formed what they called a milk dealer's bottle exchange. Now, Ray Stewart didn't want to get, now, what they would do is take in your bottles, they would pick up bottles, and they would wash them and clean them and send them back, but there was a charge for this. Ray Stewart didn't want anything to do with this, he wanted to wash his own milk bottles, so he filed an action against them to, well, first of all, he let, every time he got a chance, Bob Lamb or whoever was getting some new customer, and they'd been taking from Newell's or some other, from Northland, Newell's eventually became part of Northland. They'd take these Northland bottles, these Newland bottles, and they'd toss them behind the barn over there on the north side of Douglas Avenue. Now, Marge Alford's told me that Dad had thousands of bottles over there. Well, I don't think that was the case, but Dad finally was sued by they served a search warrant, and they went over and picked up these bottles that he had stored over there behind the barn. He was holding them. And on October 25th, 1934, he had brought a suit against this milk dealers, the Des Moines Milk Dealers Bottle Exchange. And there's a story in the paper, October 25th, 1934, the milk bottle fight is settled. Stewart absolved of alleged illegal use. Settlement of a pending test case involving possession of 348 milk bottles. Now that's a long ways from thousands of them. Recently seized from R.M. Stewart, Des Moines dairyman on a search warrant was effected Wednesday in a municipal court. A stipulation of settlement filed absolves Stewart of alleged illegal use of bottles belonging to other dairies. The bottles seized by court order represented the ordinary accumulation of bottles acquired in the ordinary course of his business, Mr. Stewart stated. Aside from dismissal, the search warrant proceedings, the stipulation provides that the Des Moines Milk Dealers Bottle Exchange complaining witness shall pay Stewart $22.15, representing the value of bottles taken from Stewart to pay the court costs. Well, $22,
That's a lot.
15 cents. So that's the story. Now, I've touched on a lot of stuff here. I'm gonna throw this open for discussion. Anybody wanna ask questions or make comments what they remember about Urbandale?
I just say, one reason why they could get by with that is that, the milk bottles, with those smaller dairies, they didn't necessarily have their name on the bottle, they just used that papery cap in the top.
Here it is, this is the newest bottle.
And so as a result, they
these
would not
belong
be
to
able to
North.
prove
Yeah.
that, some
Yeah.
of those bottles did belong to anybody else, they were
See,
just generic
yeah.
bottles.
Says Newell's Northland Milk Company, they eventually became. And on that, I noticed that on that board of the Milk Dealers Association was Ivar Erickson. He was on that eventually, they formed, of course, and these are all Newell bottles, aren't they, Norm?
Yeah,
We'd say.
yeah.
Yeah.
One of them says Des Moines on it, the rest of them
Yeah.
are not marked Des Moines. And as close as I can tell,
Norm has some of the
Newlands
thing.
bought out Northland Dairy or established Northland Dairy around shortly after they were established. I think Northland actually started in Minneapolis, and there was a branch opened here on the east side, East 6th and Des Moines Street or somewhere down in there. In fact, the stable for Northland is still in use
Yes.
on East 6th, just east of East 6th, right down there. It's an antique shop now, but if you stop in there, it was stables at one time, and part of the dairy, Bob was telling me that one of their buildings, and this must have been over on 24th and University in
Yeah.
the Drake area, that the stables were actually located above the dairy
Yes.
operation.
Oh, my.
If you can imagine taking the horses up, but it was probably easier to have a ramp and take
Yeah.
the horses up than carry the milk up there. But I had never heard of the dairy either. I started collecting Northland because when we moved to Des Moines in '53, different milk companies stopped by our house. We lived over at East 16th or West 16th and Jefferson. And we ended up with Northland, and years later I asked my mother, I said, why did you choose Northland? And she said, the driver was quite handsome. So I just inadvertently thought, I ran across some Northland bottles and I bought them thinking, well, I'll buy a few of these. Well, I think I now have about 35 Northland bottles. So then I discovered that Newlands was actually the predecessor of it, so I started looking for those.
Now, is this to open these bottles like this? Is that what that
That's,
does?
yeah, that's a
This
Newlands,
almost looks like a coat, one of those old hooks.
like a,
That's a button hook.
button
Looks
hook.
like a button hook.
But this has actually got a pointed
They got a
point
point
on
there.
it for prying up the paper lids that were on the bottles.
You remember, they had insulated, Bob Lamb brought us an insulated box and he put in there in the winter. all the time.
I have one from Northland also.
And sometimes, if it didn't have an insulated box, I remember when I was up at Iowa State, my roommate and I went out one morning and the milkman had left a couple bottles of milk. And the milk was about this high above the, when it froze, it would jump up out of the bottle. He said, look at that milk. I did find a little about the dairy plant here. The Newlands family began the dairy around 1910. Lynn Newlands ran the business out of his home on 26th Street. In 1913, the business moved to 2306 University Avenue. 3 years later, it expanded to 2312. In 1918, the dairy bought the last 2 lots on University, and the Newlands built a new building in 1922. At the time the dairy was founded, developments were being advanced in the dairy industry, and cities such as Des Moines started supervising dairy sanitation. In 1910, Des Moines hired their first city milk inspectors. Newlands Sanitary Dairy communicated their intent to produce a fresh, quality, safe product. They also used their family name and the company name to back up the product with an established reputation. Adrian Newlands, Lynn's brother and company president, had been a professor of oratory at nearby Drake University and Iowa State College before starting a successful speaking career. The dairy's name was shortened to Newlands Dairy Company in 1920s and to Newlands Northland Company after it merged with their competitor Northland Dairy and Furnace Ice Cream Dairy Company in 1929. The business moved from University Avenue in 1935 and the company made one last name change in the 40s to Northland Milk Company. Then it tells about the complex and the very deliveries of the dairy products started at midnight. The dairy brought milk from local farmers, and in order to deliver it, the milk had to be tested, clarified, pasteurized, and bottled. The 2 main reasons the milk was processed was to destroy human pathogens through pasteurization and to maintain quality product. Pasteurization was not required, so not all dairies did it because of the added expense. The dairy needed to maintain strict cleanliness at the facility. Newlands advertised pasteurized milk and cream, buttermilk and cottage cheese, and you were invited to inspect our plant. So, you know, I suspect that many of the dairies here, and these small dairies weren't complying with that. They were pretty stiff competition there. Now, the Newlands, then it tells about the bottle exchange. Once Newlands merged with Norton, much of the University Avenue plant was left vacant. The bottle exchange was moved to a facility from 1934, was moved into the facility from 1934 to 47. Newlands Northern retained the university, the ownership of the building and rented it to other business. It sold the building in 1951 to the Behrman family. Harry Behrman operated an electrical shop out of the former dairy's front office and so on. So the house that the Newlands house, and it's pictured here, was actually considered the Newlands Sanitary Historic District located in Des Moines and it shows the house here, and, it is the, what's on the,
Historic preservation.
historic preservation, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the house is still standing.
Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on here that since I live on Oliver Smith Drive, I wrote this for another article one time. Like me, you probably often have driven near past Oliver Smith Drive, wonder who is Oliver Smith, or talked with someone who says, I grew up on Oliver Smith Drive, and you think the same thing, who is Oliver Smith? And like me, again, it's a fleeting thought, only to be remembered again the next time you drive past. Well, it turns out Oliver Smith was a rather famous and successful architect of the Des Moines area. A native of Des Moines, he was raised by his parents in an established, well-off part of town, or so considered at the time. The two-story, four-bedroom home where he played with his brothers and studied for school. His childhood was not without tragedy, however. In the drowning accident of his two brothers, life would never be the same for Oliver. His father, also an architect, and we can guess at Oliver's inspiration for his interest in the field. Oliver studied at schools in St. Louis and Boston, but found his way back to Iowa to design and build a life for his family as well. His connection with Urbandale has unfortunately been raised to make way for our modern conveniences. Walgreens, located the southwest corner of 7th and Douglas Avenue, was Urbandale's first school. The two-room frame building was designed by Oliver O. Smith. Mr. Smith also designed the original Iowa State Historical Building. Now that's the old Babcock building today. And in the abstract on our house, there is $500 provided in his will for if the historical building will erect a symbol bust of himself and place it in the building. And I was over there for 25 years, and no one says that was ever done. Of course, he wanted his bust in there because he designed the building. He designed the Mercy Hospital, the Des Moines Library, many of the original buildings of the Iowa State Fairground. He became known as the official architect of the Iowa State Fair. Anybody remember the old Women's and Children's Building at the fairgrounds?
Set up at the top of the hill.
Yeah, he designed that, for sure. And some of the cattle barns. He died tragically after a Sunday afternoon of his drive with his wife in the spring of 1916. He was found in the bathroom floor having suffered a blood clot of the heart. His wife heard a noise and thought that maybe it was an umbrella that had fallen over, and she went to investigate and found that he was unresponsive. Now, here we need to, and I think that I have given some information that might not be correct because it was hearsay to me, and I don't know who told me this. And I suspected it was Mr. Stewart that said that Oliver Smith came out to look at some horses on his land, which was where the ice arena is presently. Now that is hearsay. Someone would have to look and see whether he actually owned land where the ice arena is. He did own 40 acres where Walgreens is. That's fact. But I don't know whether I have maybe given some wrong information. I may have passed that along to you one time, Virginia.
I was thinking that maybe the corner of his property was more where Oliver Smith, where the church and so forth.
Well,
That
40
it
acres.
would be the north, excuse me, the northeast corner of his property, which would mean his property would go on down south.
It would go down, that'd be 40 acres. And it shows on it, we've got a map in there to show it. It's a 40 acres in there, but it doesn't go down to the ice arena on that map.
So it may have been another parcel that he owned there.
Yeah, but, and again, Mr. Stewart or Mr. Ulfers told me that Oliver Smith drove out one Sunday to look at his horses down where the ice arena is and went back downtown and had a heart attack and died, quite young, really. So, I want to clear that because that's hearsay, what I get into the history. Oh, one other thing about naming streets. Now I'm gonna wrap it up here. And this is called the revolt of the old people. and it has to do with naming a street in Urbandale. For Cleveland, Ohio, the summer of 1936 was a time to remember. In the steaming month of July, during which a 12-day heat wave in the Midwest and East Coast cost 3,000 lives, there came to the great lakefront city a procession of people, gray, simple, 60s, and poor, all from across the nation. They came in buses and railroad coaches and broken-down Fords, carrying their battered suitcases. They found dollar lodgings in the city's outskirts and traveled to the downtown convention hall in trolleys, eating banana and orange out of bags to save lunch money. They had calloused hands and wore clean but threadbare Sears Roebuck clothing. They were delegates to the second annual convention of Old Age Revolving Pensions Limited, disciples of Dr. Francis E. Townsend, whom they firmly believed had been sent by God to save the old people of America in their time of deepest need. This year before at Chicago, the first national meeting of the organization attracted 7,000 delegates. The Cleveland Convention drew 11,000. Banners complained the three emancipators, Washington, Lincoln, Townsend. One speaker suggested that God Almighty placed this great idea in the mind of one of his servants. Another announced that the doctor was leader of a greater army than any known in history. Another wondered why no star had hung over Dr. Townsend's birthplace to guide wise men in that generation to his side. Well, Townsend had a plan that would pay every citizen over a certain age, I think it was like 55, $30 a month. The government would give them $30 a month, but they had to spend that $30. And to get another 30 the next month. It was an idea to put money in circulation. And one of our councilmen, Mr. Hammondtree, was very taken with Townsend. And he was platting some ground here in Urbandale and needed the name for a street. And so he named it Townsend. And Townsend comes from Francis Townsend. And that's especially interesting to me because Bert and I lived for 3 years in Long Beach, California. Townsend came from Long Beach. He was a doctor. Okay, enough of that. Anything else? I'm ready to wrap it up.
Any other questions?
Any questions?
Hey,
Any comments? Any boos?
Yeah.
Yeah, a thought just came to me. Can you tell me anything about early telephone service in Urbandale? Did you have an operator, or did Urbandale have its own phone system back in
I can't tell you much about the phone system. I remember that we had Browning was our exchange here, and that's BR is 27. And they
but
didn't
that
really,
was
they
part
changed
of
the numbers.
Northwestern Bell,
Yeah,
so it would have been incorporated
and I've tried to get
at
someone
the
from
point.
the phone company, the Telephone Pioneers, to come and talk to us here, and they don't seem to have a very good record of the history of the telephone service in Des Moines. Now, the telephone building, the original telephone building was at 10th and Grand, and it became the the Shrine Club,
Right,
but that was the telephone
amazing.
building.
yeah.
I remember from those watching Dwayne and Floppy, the
Yeah.
Flynn dairy commercials, you always call Cherry such and such a number. It was CH in Des Moines at least.
Yeah, there was
Right.
Atlantic,
prefix.
there was Cherry,
Amherst,
there was Browning, Crestwood,
Amherst,
was there Blackburn?
Blackbird,
Blackburn,
Little
BL.
area
Yeah,
that was really nice.
yeah, there were those exchanges. Atlantic was kind of the downtown exchange.
Don Abo might know something about it,
Yes.
having worked for the phone company
That's right.
all his life. As to whether or not there was a phone exchange in Urbandale early on. It would seem reasonable that there would have been, because being a small area.
Well, I just have been rather disappointed in trying to find someone to talk about the history of the phone business here. I can tell you that when they were digging to put in the original poles in Des Moines, they struck gold, and that caused a gold rush over behind on Fillmore
Yeah, I
Street,
know more about that.
right up at the Capitol. And
Just south of
this
University.
went on for about 2 weeks. And then they found another little fleck someplace else, but it was, you know, something that had been brought in by the glaciers. But the big cold, big gold rush ended pretty fast in Des Moines. Well,
any other questions? Dan, Beth, we will turn it over to you with refreshments. And Bob, thank you very much. So we have refreshments in the dining room and